Hello, everyone. This is my first video, and I wanted to walk you through how to find your Enneagram type. So there's a few strategies that I'll address today, but before we get started, I wanted to do a super brief overview of each of the 9 types because that's a good place to start, is kind of familiarizing yourself with those descriptions. So all of us have one main Enneagram type. That doesn't mean that we don't relate to parts of the other types or that we check every single box 500% in your main type, but what it means is we all have a particular way and primary way that we operate from and see the world. The Enneagram is all about motivation. So each type has a core fear, desire, weakness, and longing. And so that's what we're going to go over super briefly here today. So type 1 is the moral perfectionist, and that type really wants to be good and right and moral. They want to know what the rules are and what the expectations are so they can meet them. They really are afraid of being wrong or immoral or being corrupted. And they struggle with resentment, and that's because they're constantly looking around them and within them and seeing all the things that are wrong that could be better, and it makes them a little bit bitter. Type 2 is the supportive advisor. This type really just wants to be loved and appreciated and be seen as helpful. They're really afraid of being unwanted or unworthy. And so these are the types of people who will go out of their way to help you. But they struggle with denying their own needs and sometimes inserting their help when it's not wanted. And the reason they'll insert their help even when it might not be wanted is because they're really hoping that that will in turn turn to gratitude and praise. And that's kind of how they get their validation. Type 3 is the successful achiever. So this type wants to be seen as accomplished, successful, driven, and they're really afraid of being seen as incompetent or incapable or of not doing a good job. And they struggle with deceit. Type 3s tend to deceive themselves and others into thinking that they are more than they are because they're really just concerned about image. Type 4 is the romantic individualist, and this type really wants to be unique, special, and authentic. This type is really afraid of being insignificant or untrue to themselves, and they struggle with feeling that they have some sort of fatal flaw or that something's lacking that everyone else has, and so they can become envious. Type 5 is the investigative thinker, and this type really wants to be capable, knowledgeable, and competent. And they're afraid of 2 things. 1, being incapable or unknowledgeable, and also desperately are afraid of having their energy depleted. 5s tend to wake up each day with like 30% battery, and they're not sure when they're going to need to use that battery throughout the day, so they really limit and hoard and struggle with hoarding their resources, their energy, and their time. The loyal guardian is type 6, and this type really wants security and guidance. They're afraid of being without support or of being abandoned, and they struggle with anxiety, and their minds are constantly wondering, what about this, and planning for those worst case scenarios. Type 7 is the entertaining optimist, and this type really just wants to be happy and satisfied. This type is afraid of being trapped in emotional pain or of missing out, and they struggle with excess. Type 7s are constantly looking to fill themselves with experiences, material goods, sometimes food or drugs, anything to avoid having to feel any dark feelings. Type 8 is the protective challenger, and this type just wants protection for themselves and others. They're really afraid they're going to be manipulated or left at the mercy of injustice. And so they struggle with this lust for power because they think the more power they have, the better they're going to be able to protect themselves and those they care about. And then lastly, type 9 is the peaceful mediator. This type really wants serenity and security, and they're really afraid of being in conflict or any sort of tension with anyone else, and also of being overlooked. This type struggles with sloth. They're stuck in this ideal state, and they have a hard time getting going. So that's a super brief overview of the 9 types. So a great place to start when trying to figure out what your Enneagram type is to read descriptions of those different types. And I will link some books that I really recommend to get those good descriptions to this video. And then focus on motivation and not behavior. A lot of times we're tempted to make the Enneagram about behavior, but it's really about motivation and why you do the things you do. Two people could do a very similar action for very different reasons. So be thinking about what's going on inside motivation and not the outside. Another place to look at is the Centers of Intelligence Triad. So the Enneagram is broken up into 3 groups: the head, heart, and gut. Because we each operate with a primary center of intelligence. So types 5, 6, and 7 are in the head triad, and they operate and respond to circumstances with thinking and mental analysis. So when something happens, they're going to be thinking, what makes sense, what's logical, and that's how they'll respond. Types 2, 3, and 4 are in the heart triad, and they're really concerned with their feelings. They respond to life and circumstances through feeling. How do I feel about this? How does this make me feel? How might this make other people feel? And that's how they're going to operate and make decisions. And then the gut triad is types 8, 9, and 1. And that group tends to really use their intuition and gut instincts. So it's less, let me analyze and think about this, or less, how do I feel, but just, this is right. I know it. It's in my gut. And that's that. So if you're struggling to narrow down what type you might be, it's helpful to look at that triad, the Centers of Intelligence Triad, and think, do I operate mostly out of thinking, feeling, or gut instincts? And that will kind of narrow down and help you focus in on a few numbers. So you might be thinking, that sounds like a lot of work to research all that stuff myself. Can't I just take an assessment? The answer is you can, but be very cautious about that. So I'll also link a few assessments that if you really want to take an assessment, I'll recommend to this video. But essentially, because the Enneagram is all about motivation, it's really hard for an automated assessment to get at that rather than focusing on behavior and outcomes. So even the best assessments are really only about 75% accurate because they don't know what's going on inside your head. No one knows what's going on inside your head except you. So an assessment's a good place to start, just to kind of see like, oh, okay, now I know I got a type 6. I'm going to read about type 6 and see if that resonates with me. But don't take it as the final end all be all. Another thing you can do is get feedback from trusted family and friends. This isn't just, your random coworker who's sometimes in a good mood, sometimes in a bad mood, but these are really trusted people that are close to you and know you really well. And sometimes the people who know us really well see us better than we see ourselves. We all have blind spots and things we're not aware of that we do or think or say. And so it's helpful to say, I was really stressed in this situation. Can you tell me about your experience of that? Because that might help you kind of narrow down some of those numbers. And then also you can consult an expert. Enneagram coaches exist to help you, 1, figure out your type, and 2, help you figure out, I know my type, now what? What do I do with it? What's the benefit to me? And they do this through asking guided questions and having intentional conversations. So feel free to book a free consultation with me to see if that's something you're interested in. I love the Enneagram and would be happy to talk with you about that. The last thing I'll say is that self-awareness is really important on your Enneagram journey. A lot of the Enneagram can feel really exposing because there's, as you heard in the descriptions, like things about it that don't sound that great. It's not all roses, there are some thorns, but the purpose of the Enneagram is to identify behavioral patterns and ways of thinking and where we get stuck so that we can interrupt those patterns and move forward on a better growth trajectory. So be self-aware, be honest with yourself, and that's a great place to start. So reach out to me if you have any questions or want to book a consultation. And I hope that this helped you get a starting point to where to go to figure out what your Enneagram type is.